If you've been around the self-development community for like 5 minutes, then you've probably heard of a productivity method called the Pomodoro Technique. It's so popular, there are probably hundreds of apps available to help you track your Pomodoros. However, despite being very famous, the Pomodoro Technique may be very difficult to implement if you have ADHD. So today we are going to explore a little bit of the science behind this technique and try to discuss a little bit how you can adapt the Pomodoro Technique to your specific workflow. The Pomodoro Technique, developed by, let's see if I don't butcher his name, Francesco Cirillo in the late 1980s, is a time management method that breaks work into intervals, traditionally 25 minutes in length, separated by short 5-minute breaks. These intervals are called pomodoros, named after the Italian word for tomato, because Cirillo used a tomato-shaped kitchen timer when he first developed the technique. After every 4 pomodoros, you should also have a longer break. When we describe the Pomodoro Technique like this, it sounds so simple. So how can such a simple method work for so many people? First of all, research has shown that prolonged attention to a task can lead to diminishing returns in productivity and focus, known as attentional fatigue. So breaking tasks into shorter intervals can help mitigate this fatigue. In his book Sleep and Wakefulness, published in 1939, Nathaniel Kleitman, the father of modern sleep research, discussed that we operate under a basic rest-activity cycle. His findings would then lead to today's findings on ultradian rhythms. So after Kleitman's theory, other researchers intensified their own research on these cycles, apparently finding that the so-called sleep-dream cycle of human sleep is not specific to sleep, but is a general activity pattern of the brain. This cycle had regular peaks and valleys with periods of 1 to 2 hours, and this reflected in the subject's oxygen consumption, and this period was about 90 minutes. After working at high intensity for more than 90 minutes, we begin to draw on our stress hormones to do most of the work for us. And the big consequence of relying on stress hormones for energy is that the prefrontal cortex begins to shut down. Basically, this is the part in our brain responsible for our planning, decision-making, and which controls our thoughts and our actions. When the prefrontal cortex doesn't perform like it should, we become less capable of thinking clearly. Okay, so let's close the science book for a minute. Because your ultradian rhythm cycles every 90 minutes, that means that your top performance will occur basically at the 45-minute mark. So after the 45-minute mark, everything that happens is kind of a downgrade in terms of productivity. Ideally, this means that 90 minutes should be the maximum length of time you should dedicate to work or studying. So we can say that 90 minutes should be the maximum amount of time you dedicate to study or work and not the ideal amount of time. And of course that we're not talking about 90 minutes on the spot, and that's pretty obvious. The exact length of your work period will vary from person to person, but what matters here is that we're reinforcing that, just like the Pomodoro Technique tries to promote and defend, you should punctuate work with breaks. But here's where things get tricky. The Pomodoro Technique specifically mentions 25 minutes. But is 25 minutes really the optimal amount of time everyone should spend working? First of all, if you know me, you know I have a problem with recipes for success. The amount of time it takes for someone with ADHD or without ADHD to start focusing on a task can vary a lot. And this variation is based on several factors. For instance, your level of fatigue, your interest and motivation in the task that's ahead of you, whether the task is complex and difficult or not, and even things like being sick or enjoying your work and just, having a bad day in general. But if you do have ADHD, shifting into focus mode may take a bit longer than someone who doesn't have ADHD, especially if you're not very interested in the task in front of you. Furthermore, you may also struggle with task initiation in general, so the 25-minute classic Pomodoro timer may not be enough. Because if you take 10 to 20 minutes to actually start working on a task, you won't have any time left to actually work on it. Then you're interrupted by a break and the cycle starts all over again. This is further aggravated if you have a reactive job. You may be peacefully writing a report for work or answering emails when suddenly you get a call and have to run to an urgent meeting. A team member may pop up at your desk, you can get like a Slack notification saying there's something important to attend to right now, and so on. Your brain has a hard time switching back and forth between two different tasks or two different activities, and this is called task switching. However, task switching can actually be beneficial. Task switching can also help you feel more excited about the tasks that are in front of you. It may help you refresh your memory and start your work with a new and fresher perspective. On the other hand, too much task switching can be detrimental because it will make focusing even harder than it would be if you were not engaging in so many different tasks simultaneously. And this balance is actually very hard to strike. The Pomodoro technique is a classic example of task switching. In this case, you switch from a focused state to a resting state. Once you start your second Pomodoro, you either start a different task or you have to pick up from where you left off. And while starting a different task from the one you've left in your first Pomodoro may give you those benefits that task switching grants you, picking up from where you left off may be very, very difficult. According to a study titled No Task Left Behind, Examining the Nature of Fragmented Work, researchers determined that it took about 25 minutes for workers to refocus on their work after an interruption. Furthermore, when work is interrupted, 41% of the time that task isn't resumed right away. So if your Pomodoro timer rings, there's a high chance you'll feel a bit disoriented if you want to resume your task. This is aggravated if you struggle with task initiation, so you'll have to redo all of the effort you made before to focus on that task the second time you initiate it. It's also important to highlight that in its creation, the Pomodoro technique was based on personal observation and experimentation. 25 minutes worked for the Pomodoro technique's creator, but it doesn't mean that it should work for you or that it will work for you. So dividing a work or study sessions into smaller chunks divided by breaks is a great way to do your work, and it fosters rest and creates a sense of urgency and goals for each one of your work intervals. However, the amount of time you should spend working and resting should be up to you. In this case, experimentation will be your best friend, and here's my recommended schedule for you. Over the course of 3 to 5 days, divide your study or work time into differentiated blocks. Use the free template you can find in the description box below to gather your findings. On day 1, and this could be Monday, try the traditional Pomodoro technique. Work for 25 minutes and break for 5 minutes. After a full day of work, write down your findings. How much were you able to get done? Did you feel fully rested during your breaks? Do you think it took you a long time to get in a focused state in the beginning of your work session? And then on day 2, you work for 45 minutes and break for 15. Answer the same questions from the day before. On day 3, work for 60 minutes and break for 30 minutes. And once again, fill in the template. So for me, day 3 is what works the best. So when I work for 60 minutes, I feel like I have enough time to get into the mindset of the task that's in front of me. I also have a lot of time to actually execute my tasks, and then the 30-minute break really helps me completely recharge and focus before I start with the next new thing. And here's a quick note. It's essential to schedule the experiment on days when your work schedule mirrors a typical day for you. The closer these days align with your regular routine, the more accurate the results will be. Additionally, aim to maintain a consistent sleep pattern each day. Any significant variation in your baseline can change your results. So while the traditional approach to the Pomodoro technique may be beneficial for some people, it's essential to understand that everyone's brain works differently. Some people might find longer or shorter work intervals more effective. So it's all about finding what works best for you and adapt accordingly.